Whose bright idea was it to have the Super Bowl on the 13th of February and then Valentine's Day on the 14th, my guy?
Don't watch football.
I don't either. We're not sports people, but like that's a bad call, right? Like
They should have just did it on the 14th. Just
Super Bowl on the
might
14th.
as well. You're one day
Yeah,
away anyway.
no, it has to be Super Bowl Sunday, but then Valentine's Day following the next day, like all these guys are going to be hungover. Some are going to be depressed from losing.
A lot of broken hearts out there. A lot of angry girlfriends or wives.
So, in more important news, the hustle.co did a breakdown on the economics of Spotify. And they said streaming now accounts for more than 3/4 of the US industry's revenue and more than half of Warner Music. So they interviewed an artist, and the artist said that she's been on like 4 Spotify curated playlists at the same time. And she makes more money from Bandcamp in a month than she does from Spotify in a year. And that is because Spotify pays 1/3 of a penny per stream. So you're looking at $3.48 for 1,000 streams of your song. So this artist says, I don't know any artists who feel their career has been made better by Spotify, but Spotify is the world's leading music streaming platform. Basically, when this guy, Daniel Ek, co-founded Spotify, you had 3 main options for listening to recorded music. You could pay $10 to $15 for a digital or physical album, right? You could go like buy some music.
Mm-hmm.
You could pay $1 for a digital song, or you could illegally download albums and songs for free using a file sharing service like LimeWire. And basically, LimeWire and Kazaa and all those were becoming more and more popular. And then the chart of the money that was being made from recorded music basically just got smoked. So from like 1980 to 2000, things were just going up and up and up. 1999, and then things just take a huge tumble. And the Spotify, yeah, exactly. So the peak was $22.7 billion. And then the down, like the lowest point recently was in 2014 with just $7 billion. So that's a huge amount of money just evaporating.
$7 billion is a lot of money.
7 billion, but that's split. That's split for the entire like recording industry, right? So Spotify as a platform is now a behemoth. It has 406 million users on the site. 180 of them are paid, so that's almost half of their users pay for it, and it accounts for 20% of all recorded music revenue. So it's taking a huge cut. But as we can see, it's not paying artists a large sum of that money. This article breaks down like how Spotify payouts really work. And it said only 2% of Spotify artists earn more than $1,000 per year, which is pretty depressing, right?
Those are all like the top 10 artists, pretty much, like all the ones that are already making enough money from everything else.
So an even more sobering thought is that only 13,000 artists on the platform make more than 50K a year, or make 50K or more, which, you know, is like really difficult to carve out a living if you were just trying to do it through streaming. Spotify is not lucrative for most artists. Napster and Tidal actually pay the most per 1,000 streams, while YouTube pays the least.
Oh, wow.
So as podcasting is getting bigger and bigger, music artists are having a lot of trouble kind of dealing with Spotify, because Spotify is this giant, and like you have to be, it feels like you have to be on it if you make music. But then since everyone's on it and it's very saturated, and they're not paying a lot of money per stream, it's very difficult to make a living on the platform.
I was just gonna say, yeah, that's the thing. It's like when it comes to like, okay, well, who's the main giant on whatever, you know, whether it's YouTube, when everyone was going on YouTube. I mean, yeah, if you were early on it, you probably kind of reap the benefits of being first, doing new things that weren't being done on this new media platform. But then it's the same thing. now YouTube's a big thing, and sometimes getting that exposure or getting noticed, it makes it even, that much harder.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And the
yeah.
barrier to entry to make music has also come down significantly in the last 40 years, right? I mean, things have gotten much cheaper. You got, GarageBand and things like that. So that plays a part of it too. Like you could go from initial idea to a loop to publishing on Spotify within a few hours.
Hmm.
But I have a fun stat on YouTube as well because Google just released their earnings and YouTube has 2.3 billion active users, and the active users spend 23 hours a month on the platform versus 6 hours of Netflix. So this is actually suggesting that YouTube is a more successful and bigger business than Netflix, which is pretty crazy.
Probably just because it's free for everybody.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it is YouTube's not making their own content for the most part. It's the user generated content that is just churning through, and Netflix is either buying this content or they're making it themselves.
Yeah. Plus, I think there's a lot more kids on YouTube. There's a lot of YouTubers who have kind of wacky content that, like Mr. Beast, you get a bunch of kids like, oh, filling up a giant mansion with like balls from the McDonald's playpen or something. Like, so it's
Right.
like all these like wacky things that just generate like millions and millions of views. So
Right.
you have all these kids on there too. Like anyone can access it, whether you're a kid or grown adult, and it's free. It's right there. So
Yeah, that's true.
yeah.
That is very true. Have you listened to the Huberman Lab podcast?
No, no. What's that about?
Huberman is his name's Dr. Andrew Huberman, and he is basically a neuroscientist and researcher. And he decided to make his own podcast, just talking about like science and science-based tools, as he says. But basically, it just gives you like practical tips on little changes that you can make to your day-to-day life to keep your hormones in balance and keep your stress levels low and basically just overall health, like raise your overall health baseline. So one of the things that he repeats a lot is to get some sunshine in the first hour of waking up. And so like get some sunshine in your eyes, like if at all possible. And that will just kickstart your cycle of your day. He like once you start watching him, you'll hear him repeat himself on that point a lot, but it's really great stuff. He talks about like different breathing techniques to
Hmm.
like lower your stress levels. And then his colleague, Dr. David Sinclair, just came out with a new podcast.
Yeah, the thing I would be interested to hear if he has another thing for it's like, for people who wake up in the morning when the sun's not out,
Yeah.
just like get like a UV light and just flash it right in your eyes.
Yeah, so he talks about like overhead lights. Like if you can't get actual sun, like you live somewhere that doesn't have a lot of sun in the mornings, or you're waking up
You're in
at a
Alaska and
crazy
it's
time.
dark for like
Exactly,
weeks at a
exactly.
time.
So overhead lights are really important. Like just any sort of light that you can get into your system in the mornings when you wake up is better than nothing. So
Mhm.
this other podcast is called Lifespan with Dr. David Sinclair, and it is a really great. It's a brand new podcast, and he's basically doing aging research. So they do a lot of aging research and like longevity research on mice and humans. They just did like 6 episodes on the science behind why we age, and then interventions for slowing and even reversing aging. So they talk about like cold therapy. I don't know if you've seen like these cold plunges that people are doing, where you get into like 40-degree water in the
Mhm.
mornings. And they talk about saunas. They talk about diet and exercise, of course. And one of the big takeaways was just like eat less often. And so he like doesn't eat until dinner, this guy. And he's like 50 years old, but he looks way younger. And so he talks about like if you can have like a large window between meals,
Uh,
it's good for your body to be hungry.
so he's big into like intermittent fasting, that sort of thing.
Exactly, exactly. Having your body like be hungry really helps with like the repairing process, and it just like gives your body a little bit of stress, like where's my next meal coming from kind of thing. And typically like in our comfort based culture, we don't have a lot of hunger. Like we don't really spend hours and hours going
Yeah.
hungry.
Yeah, it's like you eat sometimes just out of boredom. You're like, well, I don't know what else to do. I guess I'll go.
I gotta watch the Super Bowl. You can't watch the
Yeah,
Super Bowl without
Super
food.
Bowl's on. I gotta go get a burger. I forgot to get my girlfriend a Valentine's Day card. You know,
And chocolate,
but
right?
yeah, it's weird because I've heard counter things to stuff like that. Like you
Absolutely.
hear like intermittent fasting is great. Like the fasting thing is good. You know, that's why people do juicing diets and stuff just to like cleanse and give their body almost like a restart. But then you hear, oh, you should snack a little bit every now and again just to
Yeah,
like keep
yeah.
your metabolism going. If you stop eating, your body goes into a crisis mode, which could then like induce stress and all these other things. It's crazy how you hear so many different types of health things, you know, like even dietary stuff like that. Like
Yeah.
because like I've been vegan for like a little over 2 years now, just eating plant-based. You know, I've been vegetarian before that for like almost 14 years probably.
Wow.
But then you hear people say, oh, you know, too much soy or too much of this is bad for you. It could be too much of this. You know, like the way I see it is like, well, what works for you?
Yep.
You know, there's tons of people. It's also how your body is too, or also like what you do in a day physically. Going back to the stuff for like hormones and ways to stay kind of like in good mental spirits too is, you know, just being physically active, you know,
Yeah.
or doing certain kind of like prime workout things like flat bench, or, you know, especially I've always heard that doing squats is a great way to release hormones
Yeah, yeah.
because you're doing this motion going from down up, and it's like supposed to like release a lot of hormones and stuff like that. I don't know all the science behind it,
It
but I've always heard
definitely
it's a
stimulates your blood flow and gets
it's
your
a yeah,
metabolism
just gets
going.
because you're working your entire body and it's supposed to be like a great release for that sort of stuff, like flat bench, squats, deadlifts, you know, those kind of like prime movements,
Moving those
or
big
like
muscles.
yeah, like, you know, and if you can do free weights especially, but you know, just like any sort of like free weight motion, because like you're also like utilizing all these like microfibers and stuff too, so it's like all these little things to like really like work everything.
Yeah. I
Well,
just
this is
got
turning into a fitness podcast now.
yeah, and we're not doctors, so don't take our advice. But
Yeah, yeah.
I just got two 50-pound dumbbells and
Damn,
and a jump rope. So
getting swole, man.
I've been doing all kinds of new exercises. So that's been fun. But moving big muscles, you can definitely feel a big difference throughout your day. You know, working a
Mhm.
desk job where you're either standing or sitting all day and just staring at a screen, you have to go out of your way to
Mhm.
exercise. I mean, it doesn't, we're not digging ditches here. So it's not, there's no natural exercise with our
Yeah, just
jobs.
look at my hands, dude. My hands are swole from just typing and all day.
Playing guitar.
Yeah, playing. Yeah, yeah. That's the thing. Like, it's funny. I remember for the longest time, my left shoulder was always bigger from playing guitar because I'd always have my arm like this.
Nice.
But yeah, like the great thing about dumbbells is like you can do so many things with that. Like I remember
Yeah.
when I first started getting into working out, because I used to watch wrestling a lot when I was a kid, and I saw
Nice.
Batista, and he, you
Sure.
know, because he has these like giant traps that come out. I'm just like, dang, like that. I
It's
was
a
like,
big
that
guy.
just.
Yeah.
But I was just like, I want to try getting that because I was just like this really skinny kid. I used to play basketball all day and like not do anything else, well, and play guitar. But yeah, I just got some dumbbells and like just started Googling like how to work that shoulder muscle. I didn't even know what it was called.
Right.
And then you start doing that, and then you're like, oh, and then you start, you know, doing some other types of things. Like you just like, it's just like kind of like music, like, oh, like I want to learn this. And then you start just kind of getting into it more and more. But
It's definitely a
yeah.
rabbit hole. But I would definitely check out Huberman Lab. He's like a really down to earth guy, and you know, he goes deep in the science sometimes, but he brings it back around to talk about practical tips, which I appreciate because, you know, like I'm a monkey. I just need like the what do you do? Tell me what you do, and
Mhm.
then tell me what I should do, and I'll try it out. I've been trying that out with the getting the sun in the eyes in the mornings, drinking lots of water. He talks about like a double inhale and then exhale breath for calming. So like where you breathe in and then you breathe in more and then you exhale.
Mhm.
And doing that like 5 times, you can really feel a difference in your heart rate and like your mindset. And then Dr. David Sinclair, his brand new podcast, you know, talks about diet and exercise, like specific, like really goes specific, and then additional supplements if you want to take vitamin D and fish oil and things like that. So
Yeah, that's something I do too. Like
those have
taking
been
certain
great.
supplements. I try not to like get too much into like taking like iron supplements, but like I try to eat a lot of like high iron stuff.
Sure.
Like me and my girlfriend love to steam broccoli, and
Spinach.
yeah, spinach is good too. You know, you throw that stuff in a sandwich, you know, like any kind of like leafy greens has always been good. Like also kale, like I'll make these meals where it's like brown rice and quinoa and tofu Like I have an air fryer, so I'll just cut up the tofu in squares, and then I'll cook the kale very quickly, just like, not trying to like cook all the nutrients out of it, but just enough to kind of like get all the flavors blending together.
Nice.
Super simple. It like literally takes like 12 minutes,
Right.
really quick to make. Like while I'm, air frying the stuff, I'll just do that. So always trying to like, find some kind of way to incorporate leafy greens and stuff like kale, spinach, and broccoli, man. If you can get that stuff in your diet a lot, like, because a lot of times people can have a lot of low energy levels just from that, or not drinking enough water. If you could slam a cup of water before you go to sleep, or especially when you wake up. Like I've heard people say they like to do lemon water when they wake up and stuff like that.
Yeah. So speaking of desk jobs, I read this article. It says COVID got your tongue, how to relearn the lost art of office small talk. It talks about how millennials have trouble with small talk and like talking to strangers and talking to coworkers they don't really know, which obviously you and I don't have that problem, but
I don't talk to you. I don't talk to you ever. No, I was
I would never talk to you.
never.
But basically, there's 3 tips at the bottom of this article, and it says move away from core, like kitschy, stereotypical phrases. Instead of asking a question that you've heard a million times, like, how was your weekend? Try asking, what was the most surprising thing that happened this weekend? And basically, instead of a closed question, where if you say, like, hilariously, I asked you how your weekend was before we started this, but if you ask a closed question, that leaves the other person with probably saying it was good, and that's
Yeah,
the
a
end
quick
of,
like yes or no. Like,
yeah.
oh, did you have a good weekend? Yeah.
Exactly. How about
Bye-bye.
you? How about you? Right. And so it's like if you ask a closed-ended question, you're gonna get like a short response. But if you ask, what was the most surprising thing that happened this weekend, or like did anything cool happen, it's more open-ended, and the person has like lots of options or lots of range of choices where to steer the conversation. The second tip is get out of your own head and be curious. Instead of assuming the conversation is going to be boring, listen to what people are saying and ask follow-up questions. That one makes a lot of sense. Like if you're focused on work and you're just like keeping your head down and you're, annoyed by the people around you, you have all these tasks to do or whatever. It says, instead of assuming the conversation with that person is going to be boring, if you listen to what people are saying, they probably have something interesting to tell you. And then you can ask follow-up questions. For me personally, that's how I've found like new hobbies. Like I've picked up new hobbies, new activities to do, new foods to try, recipes, things like that, is just like asking follow-up questions and truly listening to what people are saying.
I think a lot of people tend to like ask questions, but they're not like really listening. They're like asking a question so they can talk about something.
Right. They're
Don't
already
don't
planning.
be
They're
yeah
planning
yeah
out.
don't be that person who's like, so how was your weekend? Oh, it's okay. Oh, mine was great. So anyway, me and the wife went out to the mountains, and then we, our car broke down, but how that is, that I get my car, it's like, yeah, like if you're gonna ask someone a question, like ask with intent, or asking something. Like a quick way to kind of like get into someone's head is like, if you had all the money in the world, what would you do with your free time?
Sure.
Like
Sure.
that's a quick way to kind of like get into like what someone's interests are. Like, oh
More
man, I love like,
abstract. Yeah.
yeah, I love like rebuilding cars. Oh, cool. Like, how'd you get into cars? And then boom, you can like open up the floodgates of all kinds of stuff, because conversations can kind of go anywhere, and
Yeah.
it's kind of a great way to like get to the heart of what they cherish in life.
Right. Value systems and stuff. Exactly.
Mhm.
And then number 3, it says take the lead and set the tone by sharing information about yourself. So it says, like a dance, an enjoyable conversation does not come out of 2 people following. So, like you got to have somebody leading the conversation, asking the next question, making statements, making jokes, things like that. So those are the 3 tips on how to do better small talk.
Also, like I've heard other people talk about this. I've heard Tim Ferriss talk about this and stuff too. Like doing things a little bit out of your comfort zone. Like,
Yeah.
like I think one time he talked about like, hey, if you go to a Starbucks and you go to get a coffee, say, hey, do you think you can give me like a 10% discount? Doing little things that kind of scare you, or like a lot of people don't really like asking someone at the register, like, oh, how's your day, or
Sure. Sure.
little conversational things, because like I think people have this like awkwardness, like, or they're gonna think I'm like being a weirdo or prying, or or something like that. But it's like finding little ways to just do that, because then you don't really think about it. It's not like you're in your own head all the time. It's just
Right. People are
yeah.
definitely scared of rejection. So like you don't want to be told no, so you're scared of of asking for a discount, or you're scared of people thinking you're weird if you ask them how they're doing or how their day's going, or like, you throw out what's the most surprising thing that happened this weekend, or you throw out what'd you get your girlfriend for Valentine's Day.
What's your 5-year plan?
Yeah, hit them with the 5-year plan. Exactly.
Yeah, I want it in detail. I want a PowerPoint presentation. Go.
And then the last thing I have today is an article called In Praise of Listening Through Every Album by Your Favorite Artist in Order. So this idea is basically to take the discography of, say, the Beatles, or maybe someone with only 5 albums or whatever, and starting from the beginning, their first album, first single, and listening all the way up through their newest stuff. Have you ever done this?
No, not purposely. Just, or I'm gonna go like in order. It's usually always just like, oh, I haven't listened to that album in a long time. I'll throw that on.
Totally.
But never really just like sat like, all right, I'm gonna just from A to Z kind of go through the discography or nothing like that. Like I never really.
You might have done it with your own bands, the bands you're in.
No, not even. It's funny.
Okay.
It's like complete opposite. I feel like most people who I know, or for myself, like you make an album, you listen to it like a zillion times, and then maybe I'll revisit it like a couple years later.
Sure.
But usually it's like by then you're over it and you're already trying to write new stuff. So you're just like, I mean, like I've been listening to a lot of older stuff now, just like preparing for some concerts and stuff.
Right.
Just because that's more of like the practicing aspect. So I sort of have to. But yeah, not really. Yeah, it's more like I'm very like, what do I feel like listening to? Oh, I'll put that on.
I blast my songs in the car, dude. I'm my biggest fan.
You're like, that's all I got. I got the Nate Dogg playlist, and I just bump that.
I'm like, what do you want to listen to? I'm just kidding. I got to pick that.
And then your significant other is like, can you stop?
Right? Can we turn this
tooting
off?
your own horn? Can we listen to something else now? You're like, no, hold on. Here the cool part's coming up. Wait for it.
Right. Wait for the drop.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny. I always feel bad when I'm working on new music because I'm like, man, the other people that are having to like hear it in the next room are probably like, can you stop playing that part over and over? But let's say you're like working on a solo, or you're like trying to like just listen to it over and over to think like, what else can I put here? Or
totally.
Should I change this? Should I cut this part? Like you're just, it's like a lot of music creation is just listening over and over. Same thing with like video editing. You're like playing sometimes the same part over and over. Like, does this part flow right? Or, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I think a lot of art forms are the same way. Like it's just removing stuff, like the sculpting, you continue taking away more and more from the stone. But basically this guy says how it works before he starts on an album. He usually reads the Wikipedia entry and the review in AllMusic. So he's curious about performers, guests, producers, engineers, etc., and like any awards that the band got for this album. And I believe this guy's a writer, so like an author. So he says, I'm not musically smart enough to know what chromatic scales are, which studio results in the best sound, but I like to have a sense of who had a hand in the choices that went into the record. And so then he said, I'll usually listen to one album every 2 or 3 days, and he'll jot some notes after the first listen, and then 2 or 3 days later revisit those notes and basically scrawl like a review. So he'll review each album and he'll talk about the progression from like one album to the next, or the first album to the last album. You can also do this with movies. Like if you have a favorite director, you can start with their first film or their first work that you can find, and you can just like progress over time chronologically to their latest stuff. And I think that's really cool, just seeing kind of what they learned between art.
Yeah, I feel like there are certain bands that I grew up listening to, like Metallica and Pantera and stuff. And I've heard some of those albums so many times that I almost like don't necessarily need to listen to them in order.
Sure.
Even like I could just kind of like think back on it, from like Kill 'Em All to And Justice for All, or, it's like there's such a shift, like, for anyone who knows Metallica, you know what I'm talking about. So, like Kill 'Em All is very like rough, raw, just kind of more like thrashy, not really trying to be like too like overly technical or anything like that. It was more just kind of like straightforward. And then like you hear like Ride the Lightning, and it's like, oh, the guitar like they kind of up the production, guitar tones and stuff, or like, production value stepped up. The songs started like shaping a little bit more into like kind of what led their more, because like early Metallica was very like their songs started to get longer and longer, a little bit more like almost like thematic in a way.
Yeah.
But then, because like Injustice for All into the Black album was like, these like super long songs, because they would have songs like up to like 7 minutes or so, or maybe even longer. I forget at this point. But then like the Black album was like completely different. Like someone said, I like what you guys do, but we're gonna like condense these 7-minute songs into like, let's cut like 3 minutes of this off and like really like shape it. So like a lot of it was like, I think they were probably like, well, how can we like make it more and more aggressive with the guitar tones, or like make the leads more shreddy, or more thrash or in your face or whatever. And then they almost like went to this like peak, and then they just started like kind of going down. With them, you can definitely see this kind of like arc of how they progressed and stuff, which was cool. And I think it probably had a lot to do with their age. Like you start to see certain bands, like as they get older, you start to see this like shift
Yeah.
in their music. Like either they just stay the same because there's a little bit of that fear of like, well, if we make that change, are we going to lose fans? But I've always been a fan of bands that just say, I don't give a shit.
Sure.
We're going to do what we want to do. And I'm a big fan of that. I think like for anyone who's like a music writer, like when you start, like, unless you're getting paid to compose for somebody, you're going to write what they want.
Uh-huh.
But if it's like for your own stuff, you should never, ever be like writing with the idea of, are people going to like this? That's
You're selling out, bro.
Because you can still do that and still fail. And that's the thing, like that would really suck. You're like, man, like I tried to do this thing. I thought everyone was going to love it. It seems like that's what a lot of other people are doing. And then I just, you're still going to get people not liking it. So it's like at the end of the day, just do you, and that's it. That's all you can do.
Right. Most of the time, people aren't paying attention at all. But then you will have a few people who don't like what you're doing if they're paying attention. And you just got to keep rolling. You got to let that roll off your shoulder. I think another cool thing to do with chronological order is like composers you like. So I just looked up Danny Elfman's IMDb, which is of course massive, and I'm not going to listen to every score he did, but like, he started with Pee-wee's Big Adventure in 1985.
Yep.
And then 1988 was Beetlejuice. 1988 was also Midnight Run, Scrooged in 88, and then Batman, Tim Burton's Batman in 1989. So you look at his progression over those 4 years, and the dude was just writing like a madman.
Yeah, Batman, like that's where everyone I think saw Danny Elfman just level up, because I mean, like he was never really like trying to have the intention of being a film composer, but you just saw once he started kind of getting more immersed into that world and sort of what they wanted, because I believe with the score of that they wanted it to be sort of like a, not like Star Wars, but like kind of like a darker John Williams kind of score, so very like big, bombastic, and orchestral and stuff. But it's like that's why I like it, because it's kind of that style of like bombastic or orchestral music, but with that Danny Elfman touch to it. Because it's like if you have your own style, like how would you do an orchestra? Like if someone said, I want you to do a John Williams thing, but you're in your sort of style, it's going to sound totally different. Exactly. And that's what's cool is like he wasn't necessarily this like crazy concert orchestral guy, but he was like, all right, well, I'm going to make it happen and do it my way, and probably like pull a lot of hairs out in the meantime. But but that's what's cool. That's what's
straight up workaholic for sure. Yeah. But from Pee-wee's Big Adventure to Beetlejuice, you can hear it. Like if you, you play those scores, but if you just go Pee-wee to Batman, it's like, that's the same guy? Like you kind of, it's a harder jump. But if you go Beetlejuice to Batman, you're like, okay, yeah, I think I see it. And, I mean, the guy's had over 40 years of writing music. So, you could continue down this journey and listen to his latest.
Some of his other scores that I really like are like the Oz the Great and Powerful.
Oh yeah,
that's one of my favorite. Yeah, that's one of my favorite Danny Elfman scores, because and that's one of the ones that he said that he wrote without a temp, and he actually knocked it out. I think like one of the quickest scores, I believe. It was just because he just had that sort of like freedom to kind of do his thing.
Yeah, the score that I probably listened to more than any of his other ones is Spider-Man, the Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. I wore that score out.
Yeah, I remember you were telling me that was like one of your favorite ones.
I had the paper score and everything.
Yeah, that's cool. He was even a co-composer on I think Age of Ultron with Brian Tyler too, and
Oh, okay.
that's a pretty cool one because it's two different composers from different eras. You know, Brian Tyler's more like I wouldn't say new, but more recent. You know,
Definitely. Yeah.
Danny Elfman's been in the game for a while, so you know, and you know Brian Tyler, he's done a lot of the like Thor: The Dark World and like I think like Final Destination, like bunch of different stuff. He kind of became like the hot composer in Hollywood pretty quickly. He had like a pretty quick rise, and then he just started doing all kinds of stuff. But yeah, it was interesting to see someone like him who's a little bit more of like a newer school guy with Danny Elfman, who's been in the game for a long time.
Yeah.
And the score, you know, like you can hear like, you know, each one has, you know, a different one. I think they kind of like split it up, but it still works. But it's
Totally.
pretty cool to see two composers kind of tag up from different eras.
Yeah, I love that. So to finish this article, he says listening in chronological order renders the clearest picture of where artists' sound began and where it ended up. The second option, equally valuable, is to enter an artist's catalog during their peak accessible phase, which I think you were talking about with Metallica, where they hit the pop charts or become a star, which gives you great appreciation for when they zig and zag. The great treasure of music can seem dull at times. I found that giving over real considered time to an artist's work has taught me so much about art, about creative decisions, and really just about how we all get up in the morning and have to make the day happen in a way that mattered. So I am going to probably pick an artist with like less than 5 albums and try to listen to them in order.
Yeah, just you just got to find a band that doesn't have too long of songs. Like if I was to try to do that with like Dream Theater or something, it would probably take me a few days.
Yeah, and nothing that's still making new music too. That's a no-go.
But yeah, that's pretty cool. It's pretty cool concept. I think that probably is something interesting to do with your own work if you can, just to sort of see where you come from. I know I used to do that with like mixing. I'd
Mhm.
like I want to like listen to like an old mix I did just to kind of see if I've advanced at all. And like you listen to old ones, you're like, oh
Yeah.
god,
Yeah,
yeah,
your guitar playing or your singing or whatever you're doing is like
yeah.
you can hear the changes.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, of course, you know, you can always go back and listen and probably like shriek in terror, like, what was I thinking? But it's cool to go back and reflect on where you were because you
Totally.
start to think about, you know, at that time, I remember we were here, we recorded in this place. You know, I was really into this kind of band. You can hear it in the riffs that you were working on or the type of music you're writing, you know, where you were like, you know, technically or what you were getting into. And then it's cool to see the progression, I think.
Yeah, it's a time capsule. I agree.
Exactly. So since we just recently released Hyperion Strings Solo Violins, you know, and we're talking about composers and stuff, I wanted to ask you what are some of your favorite string-based scores? It doesn't necessarily have to be like only strings, but do you have any scores that you listen to that you just really love the way the strings were orchestrated and arranged and written? Yeah,
I
any of that
love
stick out?
Yeah, I love Danny Elfman's strings, like how he uses strings in his more intense stuff, like Batman, obviously, but then Spider-Man, the Spider-Man score, Edward Scissorhands, those kind of scores where he just uses like tight clusters and lots of tremolo in the high section. You can really hear what he's like trying to accomplish, and it adds a lot of tension and just like interest where they're swelling in or swelling out.
Yeah, especially like when I think of Edward Scissorhands, because there's like certain parts where it's, you know, like it's snowing and very whimsical, and like hearing these little light tremolo violins up top, like in the high octaves, like definitely
Yeah.
kind of give it that icy vibe. Like it's funny, I always wonder sometimes like if that was an intentional thing or if just those moves kind of, you know, subconsciously just kind of like influence those kind of musical decisions, which then like later on people use that as a reference, like, oh, because now like there's so many references now for certain types of things, like, oh, if you want like a very creepy sound, or you know, like when people use certain words to try to describe a musical feeling, like, oh, I want it to be very icy. It's like,
Yeah.
well, you want me to like take some ice and throw it on my keyboard? No, like
It's like cold, yeah, like cold and harsh.
yeah, but it's like trying to like, you know, when you think of like finding these sounds to try to represent that feeling or what you see on the screen, because
Yeah,
there's
it's
so
like a
many different
scrape.
ways. Yeah, yeah, and I always thought that was really cool, and just kind of thinking about it right now, like those types of sounds like make me kind of think about that very like icy.
Right. I also liked his Alice in Wonderland score. I didn't really love the movie and I didn't see the sequel, but his score for that, it was very energetic and had a lot of life, and the strings did a lot of work in there.
Hmm. Yeah.
What about you?
I've had a few recent ones. Well, one of my recent ones actually is a Danny Elfman one. He came out with this violin concerto and piano. It's like a piano quartet called
Oh, okay.
1111.
Oh, I haven't heard that.
Yeah, it's really good. I believe it's in four movements, and it was very inspired by which composer was, I think it was Shostakovich, and so it was like sort of like his. It's not a score for a movie or nothing like that. And there's another I think it's called schizophrenia serenata. It's an old piece of music that he wrote a long time ago, and it's just music that he wrote. And I always really liked those because you're kind of hearing him more and what he
Yeah,
would probably do like in his
by
own
himself.
mind.
Totally.
Exactly, like for fun, like not necessarily like for a picture. Because I mean, there's always going to be that little bit of like, okay, well, I'm writing this to this, so it's not necessarily what my gut would write for maybe like my own music. I
Yeah.
think everyone kind of does things a little bit differently when it's just for them because they're not answering to nobody. But I really love it. It's like super cool. The girl who plays the violin on the on 1111 is just she's gnarly, man. Like she's really good, super talented, and the music's awesome. It's very like what I like, very dark and kind of moody. And
Okay.
but yeah, that's a really cool one. But one of my other favorite string scores is the score for There Will Be Blood by Johnny Greenwood.
Nice.
I've listened to that so many times, and it's just so good. And it's crazy because it's like, what? It's like the guitar player from Radiohead,
Yeah, and
you
it's
know?
intense. Yeah.
Yeah, super intense, really cool. I mean, like the movie is amazing regardless, but just like how it works with the movie and just even just listening to it on its own, it's so good.
Yeah. It
And like
elevates.
yeah, and that's what kind of got me into like trying to learn about like serialism and serial music and stuff because I think he used a lot of those kind of concepts for writing the score.
Yeah, atonality.
Yeah, and it's really like that's a really interesting thing too because it's like when you listen to it, like you don't really think like, oh, it's very like, you know, typical chordal structures and trying to be, fit to a certain melodic thing. It's just it just sounds like very different.
Yeah,
And
it makes you feel uneasy, which is what it's supposed to do.
yeah, I listen to a lot of that too. Even a little side one like the Dead Space soundtrack. There's a lot of like,
Oh yeah.
cool string stuff in there.
Clusters.
Yeah, it's just clusters out the wazoo, and you want to feel uneasy, just go listen to that, or listen to it in the dark and just get scared multiple times. Thanks a lot,
Right.
Jason Graves. But yeah, like I love that kind of stuff. And but yeah, those two definitely stand out for me, especially like the solo violin stuff, or hearing solo violins being like the main focus point aside from like all the orchestral stuff. Typical like an orchestra supporting it. I always like that kind of stuff. I think it's really cool, like violin concertos. And
The solo violin library has two violins included and tons of articulations that are specialized, like flautando, collegno, Bartok pits, uh, like just all kinds of stuff that you don't really see in like Hyperion strings elements.
yeah, like one of my favorite things have lately incorporating it with Hyperion Strings elements. Like I was building a template. I'm building it or adding it to my template for some composing stuff that I'm planning on doing, and blending those articulations like the harmonic sustains or the ponticello sustains or the flautando sustains because they're very evolving
Mm-hmm.
and very naturally textural,
Yeah.
like because you'll hear like it won't just be like like a smooth, just consistent sustain. You'll hear these little embellishments and
Creaks and
yeah,
bow
and it's
noises and
exactly. And I was once I got my template all set up, I was just kind of experimenting with like, okay, loading up the sustains from Hyperion Strings elements and then layering in like the flatandos on top of that. Especially when you have a first and second violin. So now you have like two additional players like in isolation playing
totally.
these articulations very differently on top of the more chamber string. So there's just these, extra textural string beds over top of this chamber string, which just gives it like so much more detail and just this extra layer of realism
It
that
brings
just
it to life. Yeah.
yeah, it's like very inspiring to hear. Like when you just hear that, it's like those little elements can just kind of like put you in a different place and start to open up the creativity. At least that's how I felt like just doing that. I was playing around, like I started hearing like all these other instruments over top of it, and like almost like the song starts building in your head before you start even having time to like reach for other instruments in your template.
That's a
But
good
yeah,
feeling.
yeah, and even just like layering the short articulations because they're super tight and detailed and dry.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that option of blending them with other articulations, especially if you do have Hyperion strings elements, layering in those short notes with those just for that extra detail. And like I
Turn the
really like
magic
layering
button
it.
on.
But yeah, and also the behind and in front of the bridge
Oh yeah,
sustains.
scrapey.
Yeah, it like those articulations, like they don't sound pretty, but man, like basically gonna be probably a go-to. Also, like, I mean, just like the harmonic sustains have that very like eerie sound. Because what I like about the front of the bridge compared to the behind the bridge, it's like the in front of the bridge is almost like the volume knob's like around two. And then when you go to like the behind the bridge, it's like it's cranked. Like,
Yeah,
because it has this very like soft whisper, but you still hear that kind of that it's almost
gets
like this
the
breathy element of a violin.
gets the
And
hair
then
on your neck to stand up.
yeah, it's like that's like when I was doing the walkthrough, that's like what I would do if I was scoring a horror picture and I just wanted to like start making people feel a little uneasy,
Yep.
but like not going too hard. Just having it very like that soft and breathy sort of like, oh, all right, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
But then, when you want to like crank it up to 11, like those behind the bow sustains, like, or the behind the bridge, is just like very unnerving.
Right. So yeah, go
Really
check
cool.
out Craig's walkthrough of solo violins, and then you can check out my composition video. And I used a bunch of phrases from both the players and tried to kind of layer those into the composition. And that is just a composition using only that library. Do you have any recommendations? Things you've been watching, reading, listening to? What you been doing?
Recommendations wise, I'd definitely say check out the Danny Elfman 1111
I'll check it out.
album. Like it's so good. Going back to what you were saying earlier, everyone who's listening, go outside, get some sun. Like
Hey,
I've been trying to get back on that health kick, waking up early and going to the gym and stuff. And it's crazy how much that starts to help you. Like
yeah,
just it's new year. I'm just like, man, and a lot of people, it's like new year, everyone wants to start getting in shape and stuff like that. But like your health is something you can't really skip on,
yeah, you need it.
especially, because we're always inside. Got to do something. Either it's like at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day, or some try to find time to get out and take a walk and
Take a lunch break.
yeah, lunch break and then go to the gym.
Boom. I've been watching the John Adams miniseries on HBO, and it's like the 1770s and all that. And just how they lived back then is so interesting. Like they're getting inoculated for polio, and like they're getting their arm cut open and just like junk, put into their
Mm-hmm.
systems. And like that was science back then. That was like your doctor was doing his best, and like somebody gets their leg amputated and they bleed out and die, and it's like, oh my gosh, just like how good
It's
we have
rough,
it.
rough times.
Yeah, and that's only like 240 years ago, so it's like it's just a brutal time to be alive, but it's really well done. And then on a more light note, I've been watching the latest season of Curb Your Enthusiasm,
Oh yeah,
and it's so funny, man. Just the
just as ridiculous
situation,
it's always been.
the situations that he puts himself in, and like how he reacts to people is just, it's hilarious.
Yeah, I used to watch that when I was a kid, way back in the day.
So the first season
And
was in 2000, and it looks so bad. I almost can't watch it. And so like we skipped ahead, like after season like 7, things start looking way better. Like they
mhm.
invested in cameras or something. And like maybe they were doing it on purpose back in 2000 to look bad, but it looks so bad. So the newer seasons have all of like the same situational humor and like hilarious comedy, but you can actually watch it. It looks like a TV show.
Yeah. I haven't actually watched any of the newer ones, but yeah, I always thought that show was hilarious. It's just
You
like
should,
so ridiculous.
yeah, you should pop in for I think it's season 11 that we're watching. It's worth your time.
Nice. Yeah. I'm over here waiting for Better Call Saul. That's
Okay.
the next season that I'm waiting for.
Cool. I think that wraps up the topics for today. Craig, I will catch you next week. See
All
ya.
right. Yeah. Good talking. Later.